As Andy mentioned, in 2001, I made a career change that I didn't see coming. I felt like probably I would still be a crew chief when my name was in the obituaries and they were putting dirt in my face. I just never visualized myself doing anything else but being a NASCAR Sprint Cup Series crew chief. And I actually did some broadcast work between 1995 and 2000. I would do some on an off weekend or maybe a nationwide series race or a truck race on Saturday. Enjoyed it, made a little bit of money, but never saw myself doing it full time. And then at the end of 1999, when the new broadcast package for NASCAR was put in place, Fox was one of the partners that was going to get the first half of the season. And at the end of 1999, I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was down in the body shop. We were working on a car for the Daytona Speed Weeks coming up in 2000, and they paged me to the phone. And I went and grabbed the phone down there in the fab shop, and it was an Australian-speaking gentleman. He introduced himself as David Hill, the chairman of Fox Sports. And he kind of explained what their plan was, that they wanted to create a broadcast team, a lot like what they've done with the NFL, where they have a play-by-play guy, an analyst that had been in the sport. And he went on to explain that they had hired Darrell Waltrip as the driver analyst because Darrell was retiring at the end of 2000. And they had watched some of the tapes that I did, and would like to see if I would entertain being a part of their new package starting in 2001. And it was probably one of the toughest decisions I ever had to make. I involved my family, my wife, and at that point my youngest daughter Kendall was really too young to even realize what was going on. But I remember Brooke and Brandon, our oldest two kids, they were scared to death. They were going like, "Dad, where are we going to hang out now? Who are we going to pull for?" And I was just as scared as they were. But I've got to say it was a decision that we made, and we did it somewhat as a family. And I've got to say, almost 14 years later, it's one that I made that I've never looked back on. In the beginning, Fox was only offering me a 2-year deal, which I was kind of glad of because I felt like, as we've seen with a lot of football analysts that were coaches, that you can go and do the broadcast work for a season or two, and if you don't like it or they don't like you, you can always go back. And that was what, to some degree, I was hanging my hat on. But I've got to say, it's one that I have never looked back on, and it's hard to believe our NASCAR on Fox group, we're going to be starting our 14th year of NASCAR broadcasting next year, and we'll be doing our 11th Daytona 500. And for the most part, it's the same core group that's been there since the very first race back in 2001. Probably the biggest surprise of becoming a broadcaster has been my schedule. When I first did this, I thought, oh wow, my schedule's going to slow down. I'll be able to golf some, and I'll be able to fish some, and I'll be able to hang out. It's been totally to the contrary. Because as a crew chief for all those years, I was only focused on one thing and one thing only, and that was making that race car go as fast as I could make it go. Now I'm all over the place. And the great thing about becoming a broadcaster for a major network like Fox, it's led to a lot of opportunities. As I mentioned, I do 8 or 10 keynote speeches a year. It's enabled me to come here and speak to you guys this morning, which I would not have been able to do the day before checking in at Talladega. And then it even led to some other opportunities in broadcasting because I was able to do the work for Speed that is actually owned by Fox, which we'll talk about in a second. And then it led to being hired by TNT to do the middle 6 races over the last 8 years. And I even co-host a radio show on Wednesday night called NASCAR Performance on MRN and Sirius. So it has grown so much from just broadcasting those 13 races at the beginning of the season to pretty much I run about as hard, if not harder, than I did when I was a crew chief. You know, the other part that's been hard about being a broadcaster is no measuring stick. When I was a crew chief, I never needed anybody to say that was a good job or that was a bad job. I always knew we had a stopwatch, we had race results, we had points results. We had all these things that documented were we doing good or were we doing bad. Now as a broadcaster, we really don't have that measuring stick. Even still today, 13 years later, I know we'll go off the air and Darrell will look at me and I'll look at Darrell and we'll go, I don't know, I guess it was good. If it wasn't, I'm sure they'll be calling from Los Angeles in the morning. And then they always talk about Nielsen ratings. I have never met a person in my life that has a Nielsen rating box on top of their television. But I do know in Los Angeles and New York, when we get a 10 or plus, like we will for the Daytona 500, that they're awfully happy about that. But that has been, even today, doing it as long as we've been doing it, you kind of know if it was good, you kind of know if it was bad, you know what you would do different. And of course, in broadcasting live television, there's no do-overs. There's no taking it back. Once you say it, you've said it, and I promise you, there's about 10,000 people on the internet just waiting for you to say something wrong where they can do a blog about it. But that's definitely been one of the toughest parts. You know, the one thing that I'm proud of our Fox broadcast team, whenever you have success, the biggest thing that starts taking over is egos. It's what takes a lot of top sports teams that's been successful and all of a sudden they're not successful. And when I look at our Fox teams, are you kidding me? Darrell Waltrip, Jeff Hammond, Larry McReynolds, Mike Joy, just to name a few. That's enough ego to fill this room and start oozing out the cracks of the door. But I think what we've done as a group, collectively together, race after race, year after year, is we've just looked at each other and said, you know what? Let's just have a good broadcast. We're not worried about our individual egos. And I think as long as we keep that concept, that we can continue to have successful broadcasts. You know, people will ask me about pressure. And honestly, the pressure that I put on myself as a broadcaster, it's the most pressure, and nobody else really puts pressure on me. And I love quotes, and my wife all the time, she'll say, where did you read that quote? But I do have a quote that I want to read that I read in a magazine about a year ago. And I don't know if most of you know who Chuck Noll was, but of course Chuck coached the Pittsburgh Steelers in the 70s to 4 Super Bowl wins. In fact, still today, he's the only head football coach to have 4 Super Bowl wins. But I love what he said about pressure. He said, there's pressure in anything you do, but it's also a stimulant that makes you perform, makes you function, and makes you go. And when I think about pressure, and I read that, in my book, no truer words were spoken about anything we do in life, whether it's personally or professionally.